Apple's making it easier for you to go into the App Store to find out which apps are using your personal data. Adrian Kingsley-Hughes here for ZDNet to explain this further for us. Adrian?
Apple said a long time ago, hey, developers, you're going to have to clean up how you handle people's data, and you're going to have to tell people what you do with it. And so now every new app that's submitted to the App Store or an update that's submitted has to come with a list of, what data does it hold on you and collect, and what do you do with this data? And some of it is some companies haven't submitted new apps since then, so I haven't seen things like what Google will be doing, so they haven't updated their apps just yet. But it'll all be interesting. Facebook is one of the ones. It had the longest I could find.
And Adrian, you kind of touched on it, but this really shouldn't come as a surprise to people, right? That so much of their data is being taken and used.
Yeah, people who know it's going on know it's going on. The rest of the people are just going to hit download, download, download. I've always been surprised, because I've always looked over the years how to make tech as simple as possible. And yet you look at things like Facebook, you've got people who find tech very difficult, are doing quizzes endlessly. What kind of cabbage am I? I mean, and I wish all tech could be that simple, but they really seem to have fine-tuned this idea of collecting data on people to a great degree.
All right, and Adrian, you mentioned earlier we were talking that you did a screen grab to show, some of the apps that are using your data. Any surprises there?
Do you know what? I wasn't really. I know Facebook has a lot of data on me, but to see it as a big list, it's a pretty big list. And when you actually see it in front of you as a big list, I think it's going to become that point where you compare, well, how much does this have on me versus this? And why is this list so big? And why is this one a little bit smaller? And I think, again, companies like Facebook, they've turned this into a science. They've turned it into an art form. They're very good at it. Now Apple's saying, hey, you've got to show people what you're doing. You've got to actually tell people what you're doing. You've made it very underhanded in some ways. You've put a veil over it that people can't see it. Now you've actually got to put it in there and tell people what you're doing. And I think that's going to be interesting. But I think it's the little players that it's going to be interesting when you download a game and it has a massive list of things it's collecting on you, or you're doing some of these face swap apps, which have been a bit of a privacy nightmare anyway. What kind of data is it collecting on you? Apple's been very good on stopping all this nonsense of like flashlight apps, wanting to know your location for some reason, or wanting access to your contacts and all this kind of stuff. And I think we saw when Apple started to put notifications when the clipboard was being used, that freaked some people out, some developers out, when all of a sudden you're using something like Instagram and you're saying, hey, why is this pasting my data? Oh, it's a mistake. Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Who knows what it is? But Apple is bubbling these little privacy things up to the surface. It's making people see when their camera's switched on, when the microphone's switched on. And I think it's making it harder and harder for data to be collected about people in an underhanded way.
All right. And lastly, Adrian, where do people go to access this information?
Well, basically, you go into the App Store and you find the app that you're interested in, and you scroll down the bottom and there's a little bit called App Privacy. Then you click on that, and then depending on sort of what kind of privacy you're getting from that app, it's either going to be a very short list or it's going to be a very, very, very long list. As I say, at the moment, some companies haven't updated their apps or haven't submitted new apps. So there's still gaps in this. When I looked the other day, there was nothing about Google in there, which will be interesting. But there are gaps in there, but this is soon going to get filled up. And it'll actually be a very interesting way to watch what legacy apps are there as well, because it's very hard to spot old apps that you have. And this will be one way. What does it have this or does it not? You can look when the last update was put in, but this will be an interesting little delineation. Does it have a privacy policy or not? And I wonder how long it'll be before Apple decides to give the heave-ho to apps that don't have a privacy policy at some point.
All right, hopefully that's the next step. Adrian, thanks so much for your insight on this. Make sure you check out Adrian's full article on ZDNet. We appreciate you watching us here today.